A pack could survive winter hunger, failed hunts, even war, if its laws still meant what they claimed. A bloodline endured because witnesses remembered and truth held under moonlight. When law became theater and grief became evidence against the grieving, a woman learned quickly that belonging was conditional, and condition was another word for leash. Astrid Nightshade had believed vows could outlast politics. By dawn on the fourth day, with labor tearing through her body and frost on her lashes, she understood a harder rule. If she wanted her child to live, she would have to outlast everyone who called betrayal duty. The border infirmary sat in a notch of black stone where two territories touched, but trusted neither. Smoke from its iron chimney smeared the pale sky. Astrid reached the steps with one hand braced under the curve of her belly, and the other slick with melted snow from the railing she had nearly fallen against. Her boots were split at the seams. Her braid had come loose sometime in the second night of running, and now dark hair stuck to her throat and cheeks. Every muscle from hip to spine trembled from fatigue and contractions that had turned from warning to command. The sentry at the door smelled her before he looked up. His nostrils flared, taking in burnt cedar, fear sweat, and nightshade blood beneath both. "You came alone?" he said. She nodded once because speech cost too much breath. "No escort. No pack mark beside your own." His gaze dropped to her belly, then back to her face with a cold, practical calculation. "Name: Astrid Nightshade, widow of Rowan Nightshade." The words cut on the way out. "I need a birthing room now." At Rowan's name, a younger healer behind the desk stiffened, then glanced toward an older woman sorting cloths by the hearth. The older woman did not look up right away. "Still taking her?" the sentry asked, not quietly enough. The older woman finally turned. Her hair was iron gray, braided tight, her mouth narrow with the habit of disapproval. "We do not leave a laboring mother in the snow," she said. "Bring her." The line should have sounded merciful. It sounded like policy. They took her to a narrow room with stone walls, one small window, and a birthing cot set too close to a draft. Copper basins steamed near the bed, filling the air with wet heat that fought the mountain chill and lost. Astrid tried to drink when they offered water, but another contraction bent her forward so sharply she nearly slid off the mattress. She bit down on a folded strap to keep from crying out Rowan's name and failing to finish it. In the edges of pain, she catalogued what mattered. 2 healer assistants, 1 guard by the door, midwife's satchel on the left table, buckles worn smooth, vials wrapped in leather, a bundle of fresh swaddling cloths, stamped with border seals, another bundle near the washstand that carried a wrong scent under the soap. Stillness, old milk, grief gone cold. The midwife approached with a stoppered vial and a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "For the pain," she said, "you are exhausted. This will keep you calm and compliant so the child does not suffer." Astrid turned her head away. "I can push without it. It is not a request." The midwife reached for her wrist. Astrid bared her teeth, a reflex older than manners. "Do not touch me unless I say." The guard shifted at the door. One assistant pretended to rearrange towels while listening too carefully. Another contraction struck, harder, and Astrid's vision went white at the edges. She wrote it, shaking. When it passed, she heard the midwife at the table, speaking too low for human ears and too careless for wolf ones. "Fenris Ashford wants this clean. No struggle." The assistant whispered back, voice quavering. "And the other infant?" "Wrapped and ready. You hand me the blue cloth when I tell you." A wall she had not known she was still holding up gave way behind Astrid's ribs. Not shock. Confirmation. Fenris had followed her even here. In her mind, words came in the raw present tense, the only way she could hold them. "Do not faint. Do not close your eyes. If you sleep, she takes your daughter. If you scream too soon, they sedate you. Count breaths. Track every hand. Survive this minute, then the next. Rowan is gone. The pup is not. I am not done. I am not done. The room narrowed around sound and scent. Metal. Sweat. Cedar from a cloak hanging just beyond the doorway where no one had stood a moment earlier. Then a contraction slammed through her, primal and merciless, and she cried out despite herself. Now! The midwife snapped. Hold her shoulders. Hands moved toward Astrid. Another hand intercepted first, catching the midwife's wrist so fast the motion blurred. The vial dropped, shattered, and sharp medicinal fumes flooded the room. A man stepped from the shadowed corner near the hearth as if carved out of it. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark coat damp with dawn mist, jaw set like granite. His gaze swept the room once, and when amber bled bright through his irises, every guard lowered their eyes on instinct. Try that again, he said quietly to the midwife, and you will explain your choice from the floor of a tribunal cell. The midwife went pale. Alpha King Brennan Valewood, she breathed. Astrid clutched the blanket and stared at him through pain and fury and the rising panic of one more powerful male in a room where power had already failed her. She knew the name. Everyone did. Ruthless in war. Precise in law. A king who broke sieges without burning crops, then executed oathbreakers in public so no one called his mercy weakness. I am in labor, she said, each word cut short by breath. If you came to negotiate, leave. His gaze shifted to her, and for one suspended heartbeat the hard command in him altered, not softened but focused. He crossed the space in 2 strides and knelt beside the cot instead of looming over it. Look at me, Brennan said. She almost refused on principle. Then another contraction seized her body and she grabbed blindly for balance. He took her blood-slick hand and pressed it flat over the center of his chest, steady as an anchor. Breathe with me, he said. In, hold, out. The contact detonated through her senses. Heat lanced from pulse to pulse, a golden thread snapping tight between them like a drawn bowstring. His scent crashed over everything, cedar after rain, distant thunder, cold iron turned warm by skin. The iron tang of labor receded beneath it. Instincts she had locked down beneath grief surged awake, fierce and terrified and certain in the same breath. No, not now. Not him. Brennan's shoulders went rigid. His pupils widened, then narrowed to predatory focus. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to something reverent and wrecked. Moon witness, he whispered, too low for anyone but her. You. Astrid wanted to wrench her hand away, wanted to hold on, wanted Rowan back, wanted the room to stop splitting open along old loyalties and new claims she had not consented to. Another contraction answered for her. She bore down with a raw cry, and the world became effort, pain, and the relentless command to keep going. By full morning, 3 nights earlier had already begun to haunt every breath she took. It had started with smoke before sunset, thick and greasy, rolling over the nightshade lower dens where Rowan had gone to meet a scout who never arrived. Astrid had been in the herb shed sorting winter root when the alarm horn cut off mid-note. Not ended, cut off. She ran uphill toward the main path and saw flames crawling across the cedar beams of her own den, too controlled for accident, too fast for storm fire. Men in nightshade colors stood in the yard and did not form a bucket line. Her older cousin Corin blocked her with one arm. Do not go in. My mate is inside. His jaw flexed. The roof fell. She shoved at him, but another shape stepped from behind the well. Fenris Ashford, clean boots and ash, black cloak unmarked by cinders. He had married into their line and learned quickly how to wear concern like ceremonial armor. Astrid, Fenris said, voice smooth as polished bone. You should not be breathing this smoke in your condition. She heard no grief in him. No urgency, only calculation. Where is Rowan? Fenris tilted his head toward the burning doorway as if indicating weather. Beyond help. The sound that left her then did not feel human. It scraped her throat raw. She tried to lunge past again, and this time 2 men caught her by the elbows. She kicked, twisted, nearly broke free, then a pain low in her abdomen dropped her to one knee. Not full labor yet. Warning. Her body choosing survival while her world collapsed. Fenris crouched so they were eye level. His gaze went to her belly and lingered. Listen carefully. The council has concerns about succession stability. In grief, widows make dramatic choices. We can prevent disorder if you cooperate. Cooperate with what? With guardianship. He smiled without warmth. A male heir will be presented through proper channels. Your child, if viable, can be fostered quietly. You will be honored, cared for, and kept from further strain. She tasted ash and understood the shape of the trap. Not only murder, replacement. Paper seals, witnesses bought, lineage rewritten while she was sedated in some sanctioned room. You killed him, she said. Fenris did not deny it. I preserved the pack. Corin looked away. The next moments fractured into instinct. Astrid drove her heel down on one guard's foot, slammed her forehead into the other man's nose, and broke free, while both cursed. She ran behind the smokehouse instead of toward the main gate, because the main gate would be watched, and cut through the old lambing tunnel that opened near the lower creek. Brambles tore her sleeves. Cold mud swallowed one boot to the ankle. Behind her, Fenris shouted orders without raising his voice. Take her alive, no marks on the face. If she reaches the border, send word ahead. She did not stop. Night swallowed the path. Branches whipped her cheeks. Twice she doubled over, palms braced on her thighs, waiting for the cramp in her abdomen to ease enough to move again. She drank from stream water that tasted of stone and leaves. She slept in bursts of minutes beneath uprooted roots, waking at every snapped twig with Rowan's name in her mouth, and nobody to answer. By the second night, snow began as dry needles. By the third, her legs shook continuously, and her child pressed low and heavy, each step a negotiation with pain. At dawn of the 4th day, she saw the border chimney and kept walking, because collapse was a luxury she could not afford yet. Now, on the infirmary cot, with Brennan's hand steadying the back of her shoulders while the midwife stood disarmed and trembling 2 paces away, Astrid dragged air into her lungs and chose the only decision left to her. She would not run again. She would not run again. And the decision settled into her bones with the same blunt force as the next contraction. Astrid gripped the cot frame until her knuckles blanched, dragged breath through clenched teeth, and watched Alpha King Brennan Valewood without blinking. The midwife still stood in his grip, wrist trapped, face gray. One assistant had backed into the washstand hard enough to rattle copper bowls. The other stared at the shattered vial on the floor, as if denial alone could seal the fumes back inside glass. Brennan did not raise his voice. Captain Ives, he said, eyes still on the midwife, detain everyone in this room except the laboring mother and healer Tamsin. No one leaves. No one speaks to outside runners. Seal the corridor and post 2 witnesses at this door. Bootsteps thundered in from the hall. 3 of his wolves entered in dark leather and winter cloaks, insignia stitched at the shoulder in silver thread. Their discipline struck her first, even through pain. No bared fangs, no swagger. They moved quickly, efficiently, and did not touch her bedding, her body, or the bassinet frame waiting by the hearth. One took the midwife's other arm. Another retrieved the blue swaddling bundle from the washstand with gloved hands and held it away from his chest like contaminated evidence. Astrid forced words out between breaths. This is Valewood Command? Brennan turned toward her. Border Command under my authority. Her laugh came out rough and breathless, not humor so much as disbelief sharpened by terror. Then I ran into one trap to escape another. A flicker crossed his expression, there and gone. If I wanted your child taken, I would not have stopped them in front of 6 witnesses. Witnesses can be bought. She swallowed, throat burning. I have seen it. Then we use the kind that cannot be bought. He nodded toward the guard now sealing wax over the latch seam. Sent oath and written seal. In your name. Another wave seized her. She doubled forward with a strangled cry, and his hand came up, then paused mid-air. He waited. Permission, he said quietly. The word scraped against old injuries. Men like him gave orders, took compliance, called it necessity. Yet he was kneeling in birthing blood and broken glass, asking like she still owned herself. Astrid gave one sharp nod. He braced her shoulders from behind, broad palm warm through damp linen, grounding without forcing. She rode the contraction, shaking hard when it passed. Healer Tamsin stepped in, sleeves already rolled. She was younger than the traitor midwife by 2 decades, with cropped black hair and forearms corded from years of work. Highness, I need clear space and hot water now. She is transitioning. Brennan rose at once, crossed to the hearth, and dragged the iron kettle forward with a cloth wrap. No ceremony. No hesitation. The king who broke sieges fed kindling into the stove and poured steaming water into basins while his soldiers bound conspirators against the wall. The contrast unsettled Astrid more than threat would have. Cruelty was legible. This was not. By the time the corridor door thudded shut and the latch sealed, the room smelled of pine smoke, antiseptic herbs, sweat, and the thin metallic tang of fear from everyone except him. Brennan stood by the bedside again, close enough for her to catch cedar and storm on his skin, distant rain carried into stone walls. His cloak had been unfastened at the throat sometime in the rush, revealing a line of old scar tissue across one collarbone, pale against bronze skin. A warrior's map. Survived things she did not know. You are safe in this room, he said. No, she answered, voice ragged. I am in labor in enemy territory with a dead mate and half a council hunting my daughter. Safe is not the word. Something ancient looked out through his eyes then. Not anger exactly. More like recognition of a truth he had no right to soften. Fair. Then hear a precise statement. He lowered himself to one knee so they were level again. Under Valewood law and border law, no one removes your child from your body or your arms without your explicit consent while I stand breathing. Say the child's name when you are ready. It will go into the first record. A name? She had whispered possibilities to Rowan in the dark when they still believed time was generous, when they planned spring planting and argued about whether she would inherit his stubbornness or hers. Grief punched through her chest, clean and savage. She let it come. Let it burn. Lyra, Astrid said. Brennan repeated it as if it were an oath. Lyra Nightshade. Healer Tamsin checked her pulse, then reached for her abdomen and paused, glancing at Astrid first. May I? Astrid nodded. Tamsin's hands were competent, brisk, no tremor. Good position, strong heartbeat. She met Astrid's gaze directly. You are doing this well. Keep your chin down on the next push. The phrase cracked something tight behind Astrid's ribs. Not pity, not condescension, just belief in what her body could do. It made her eyes sting harder than pain. Minutes blurred into effort. Brennan relayed short commands toward the door without looking away from her. Runner to tribunal clerk, immediate. Mark as attempted lineage fraud. Bring 2 elders not tied to Ashford. Then softer, to Astrid. You are not alone in this minute. Stay with my count. She hated how much that steadied her. When the next contraction gathered, Tamsin planted her feet and said, Now, push into it. Astrid bore down. Fire tore through her spine into her hips. She gasped, slumped, then found Brennan's forearm under her elbow holding her upright through the tremors. His pulse hammered under her fingers, fast but controlled. The room narrowed to breath. pressure, and his voice counting low near her ear, each number a stake driven into shifting ground. At the doorway, one of his guards tried to meet his eyes and immediately dropped his gaze instead, neck bent in instinctive deference as Brennan's aura rolled outward, heavy as forged iron. The assistants who had listened to Fenris stood rigid, throats working, their scents sour with panic. Astrid saw, with bleak clarity, what his people were. Not kinder wolves by nature, but wolves governed by a structure that punished betrayal faster than it rewarded it. A non-trivial difference when survival hung on minutes. Tamsin checked again and nodded once. Crowning soon. Astrid tipped her head back against the cot post, sweat cooling too quickly on her skin. The mountain draft found every damp seam and bit deep. Fatigue surged up from nowhere, black and thick. I can sleep for one breath, her mind whispered. Just one. No. Stay awake. Stay here. If I fade, they rewrite me. Her thoughts shifted into the raw present where fear lived. I am still in this room. I am still in my body. My daughter is real. Rowan is gone, and that does not make me empty. Pain means she is moving. Breath means I am fighting. I do not need to trust this king to use him. I do not need to forgive the moon to survive what it chose. One push, then another. Keep the scent of cedar in front of me and the memory of ash behind me. Let the dead keep witness. Let the living try to take her, and fail. The contraction hit like a falling wall. Astrid cried out and reached, not for strategy, not for pride, just for leverage. Brennan caught her hand instantly, then stilled as if struck. Their palms locked, blood and sweat slick between skin, and that golden thread that had sparked earlier snapped taut with brutal clarity. Heat drove up her arm and across her chest in a fast, searing arc. Her hearing sharpened until she could separate every breath in the room. The drip of kettle water on stone, the scrape of a boot sole, Tamsin's heartbeat, Brennan's, thunderous and staggered for one astonished beat. He inhaled sharply. Amber flooded his irises to the edges, bright as banked fire punched open. His shoulders went rigid, then slowly lowered as if he were bracing against impact from within. The scent between them deepened, cedar wrapped in rain and cold metal, now threaded with something sun-warm and wild that made the animal part of her go very still. No, her mind reeled. Not now. Not with Rowan's ashes barely cold. Not with blood on the sheets and enemies in the hall. Yet the pull did not ask permission. It recognized. Brennan did not tighten his grip, but he did not let go. Astrid, he said, voice roughened to a near whisper. Look at me. She did. Their gazes locked, and the room seemed to tilt around that single line of sight. He looked less like a distant king and more like a man standing at the edge of a precipice he had not expected to find, every instinct sharpened, every defense failing in real time. Not hunger, not conquest. Shock laced with reverence and a fear that mirrored her own. Tamsin's voice cut through from somewhere near Astrid's knees. Do not stop now. Next contraction. Push with it. Brennan's thumb moved once over the back of her hand, a barely there stroke that sent another wave of warmth through the bond, lower this time, settling in her sternum like a brand without pain. She jerked at it, angry at her own response. You do not get to claim me because the moon made a mistake, she said, each word bitten short by breath. His answer came immediately. I claim nothing you do not choose. His eyes burned brighter. He looked wrecked by the same force pinning her in place. Another contraction mounted. Astrid groaned, folded forward, and he shifted with her, one arm behind her shoulders, the other hand still clasped with hers. She felt his control in the minute mechanics of it, the restraint of claws she could not see, the careful distribution of strength so he supported without confining. Her body strained. Heat and pain and scent and memory collided until thought fractured into flashes. Rowan smiling over winter root bundles, Fenris's clean boots in ash, Brennan kneeling in blood asking permission, Lyra's heartbeat, fast and fierce beneath her own. Now, Tamsin urged, hard push, again. Astrid bore down with a cry that tore her throat raw. The thread between her and Brennan flared, not burning, more like a door forced open by both of them at once. She felt, for a disorienting heartbeat, his fear too. Not of battle, not of death, but of failing this exact moment and losing something he had only just understood he could lose. His forehead nearly touched hers. "Stay with me," he murmured. "I am not yours," she gasped. A ghost of grim, incredulous humor touched his mouth even then. Noted. Tamsin laughed once under her breath, 30 heartbeats of tension cracking without breaking. "You two can negotiate hierarchy later. Push." Astrid might have snarled if she had breath to spare. The next wave crashed through her and she gave it everything left. Brennan counted against her temple, low and steady. 1, 2, 3, 4. She pushed until stars burst behind her eyes. The room spun, then snapped into focus on his face again, those molten irises fixed on hers, no retreat in them. "Again," Tamsin said, fierce now. "I see her. Again, Astrid." Lyra, her daughter. Real, near, alive. Astrid tightened her grip on Brennan's hand hard enough to bruise, and met his gaze as the next contraction rose, a storm climbing the mountain with nowhere else to go. The storm in her body broke all at once. Astrid pushed with a sound torn from somewhere below language, and then pressure became release. Pain became a new kind of ache, and Lyra slid into healer Tamsin's waiting hands with a furious living cry that cut through stone walls, politics, and fear like a blade. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The entire room held still around that voice. "Daughter," Tamsin said, already clearing the infant's mouth, brisk and sure. Strong lungs, strong pulse. Astrid reached forward blindly. "Give her to me. Now." Tamsin wrapped the baby in fresh cloth from the sealed stack, not the blue bundle, and placed her against Astrid's chest. Heat met heat. Tiny weight. Damp dark hair at the crown. Lyra's scent was milk-sweet and wild and undeniably hers. Astrid inhaled once, twice, memorizing. "I am here. She is here. No one takes her." Her thoughts came fast and sharp in the present tense as exhaustion tried to drag her under. "I do not sleep yet. I do not surrender the child to custom, to rank, to any man who calls theft stability. I keep my eyes open. I keep one hand on her spine. If they ask to help, I ask why. If they pressure, I refuse. I am still bleeding, still shaking, and still dangerous enough." Brennan stood a half step back, breathing hard as if he had run a mountain ridge. The gold in his eyes had dimmed to ember amber, but the bond between them still hummed, a taut line she could feel beneath skin. He did not reach for Lyra. He did not touch Astrid again until she looked at him. "The cord," Tamsin said. "Custom says the father cuts." "No," Astrid said, immediate. Brennan met Tamsin's gaze. "Give her the blade." Tamsin set a short birthing knife in Astrid's palm, handle wrapped in linen for grip. Astrid cut the cord herself, hand unsteady but precise, and watched Brennan watch her with something like respect stripped to its barest form. Not indulgence, not pity, recognition. Captain Ives entered when summoned, took one look at Lyra, then at the bound midwife and seized assistant, and spoke toward Brennan without lifting his voice. "Tribunal clerk is in the hall. 2 elders arrived under protest. They demand jurisdiction." "Tell them they can demand from behind a closed door," Brennan said. "The mother stabilizes first." The words should have sounded ordinary. In that room, they landed like law. The next hour came in fragments. Tamsin stitched, cleaned, and checked bleeding while Astrid refused to relinquish the child even once. Brennan stayed, not hovering, not absent, simply present near the hearth where he could see both the corridor and the cot. When Lyra rooted and fussed, Astrid turned away to nurse, jaw tight with pain and embarrassment and stubborn pride. Brennan shifted his stance to block line of sight from everyone else in the room, creating privacy without speaking about it. When Tamsin finished, she packed evidence with ritual care: shattered sedative vial in oiled paper, wrong swaddling cloth sealed in wax, written statements from the assistants while their fear was still fresh enough to make lying difficult. Brennan signed as witness, then held the stylus out. Astrid adjusted Lyra against her shoulder and signed beneath him. Bloodline mark pressed deep enough to score the parchment. Only then did the shaking begin. It started in her hands and spread up both arms until Lyra whimpered at the vibration. Postpartum chills struck hard in the mountain draft, sudden as ambush. Astrid clenched her jaw to keep her teeth from chattering and failed. Tamsin swore softly and reached for another blanket, but Brennan was already moving. He took his own cloak off first, heavy wool lined in fur, still carrying cedar and winter rain. He stopped beside the cot and waited, cloak folded over his forearms like an offering rather than a command. "Permission," he said. Astrid stared at him through fatigue and suspicion so old it felt structural. "For what?" "To cover your shoulders. Nothing else." She gave one stiff nod. He laid the cloak around her without brushing skin he had not been invited to touch, tucking the edge near Lyra's feet with the same care he might have used handling treaty documents that could start wars if torn. Warmth spread slowly, then all at once. By nightfall, the infirmary had gone quiet except for wind against stone and the occasional bootstep in the corridor. Tamsin slept in a chair near the door, chin to chest, trusting the posted guards and Brennan's standing order. Astrid did not sleep. Lyra dozed in the crook of her arm, tiny mouth slack, one fist opening and closing against Astrid's collarbone. The moon poured thin silver through the narrow window, turning the room into slate and bone. Brennan returned carrying a basin of reheated water and clean cloths. No attendants, no announcement. He set the basin on a stool and crouched near the foot of the cot so she could see his hands. "Your wrists are still sticky with dried blood," he said quietly. "If you want, I can pass you cloths, or I can help. Your choice." She watched him for a long moment. Kings usually delegate this. Kings who forget what bodies cost are useless where it matters. It was not charm. It sounded like something he had paid to learn. "Pass me the cloths," Astrid said. He did. She wiped one hand awkwardly while balancing Lyra. The other shook too badly. Brennan waited until she exhaled in frustration, then asked, "May I hold her while you clean the second?" Astrid's whole body locked. The bond between them pulsed once, alert and bright, and she hated that it registered fear faster than pride. "No," she said. Brennan inclined his head as if she had granted a formal request. "Understood." He wrung out another cloth and held it where she could reach. No pressure, no wounded offense, just adaptation. The silence stretched, thick with unsaid things and the small wet breath of a sleeping newborn. Astrid finished cleaning her hands and set the cloth aside. "You could claim protective authority right now," she said, voice low so Tamsin would not wake. "Call me unstable. Call me unfit. Plenty of counsels would support you." "I could," he said. "I will not. Because of the bond. Because law is only useful if it restrains the powerful first." He paused. "The bond changes what I feel. It does not change what is right." She looked at him then. Really looked. At the scar crossing his collarbone, at the exhaustion around his eyes he had hidden from everyone else, at the control it took him to stay 3 feet away from both her and the child, when every instinct in him clearly wanted closer. "Why this restraint?" she asked. "Men like Fenris call restraint weakness." Fenris confused possession with protection. Brennan's mouth thinned. I made a similar mistake once. Different shape. I thought force and speed could solve grief. I pushed someone I loved into a route she was not ready for, because delay felt like failure. His gaze shifted briefly to the window, then back. She died on that road. Not by my hand. Because I believed urgency gave me the right to choose for her. It did not. The confession sat between them like a newly opened wound. He offered no details, no names, no plea for absolution. Only fact. I do not repeat failures, he said. Not this one. Astrid felt the tight knot behind her ribs loosen by a fraction. Not trust yet. Something adjacent. Space where trust might someday stand. Lyra stirred and made a soft, offended squeak. Brennan's expression changed instantly, hard edges easing in a way so unguarded it startled her more than his authority ever had. She sounds like she disapproves of my timing, he murmured. Astrid made a short, unwilling laugh that shocked both of them. She disapproves of everything currently. A sensible heir. The humor lasted half a minute, barely enough to breathe in, but it broke the pressure without cheapening it. Astrid adjusted Lyra, then said, "Sit if you're staying. You're making the room tense." He sat on the floor beside the cot, back against stone, long legs stretched out, visibly keeping himself below her eyeline. Not dominance, not theater. Deliberate choice. They stayed like that while wind combed the mountain and moonlight climbed the wall. Astrid spoke Rowan's name once, then again, and when grief hit like surf, Brennan did not interrupt, did not advise, did not reach unless asked. He listened while she described ash in her lungs and Fenris's clean boots, and the exact pitch of the horn that had cut off mid-note. Her words shook, broke, resumed. He received them like testimony. Sometime near dawn, she slept for less than an hour with Lyra against her chest, and Brennan awake on the floor, guarding the door without pretending he was not. 3 days passed before the tribunal convened at the mountain fortress, and every hour between was consumed by procedure, signatures, and containment. The great hall had been built to impress enemies and discipline allies. Vaulted beams, black banners, stone dais carved with old log glyphs that glimmered faintly under moonglass lamps. Elders from border packs filled the side benches in layered furs and ceremonial metalwork. Sense of distrust and curiosity braided tight in the air. Lyra slept in a cradle beside Astrid's chair, swaddled in cream wool bearing both nightshade and veilwood marks by legal order, not sentiment. Astrid wore a plain dark dress and Brennan's cloak clasped at the throat, her own garments ruined in the birth. She felt every gaze on the curve of her postpartum body, the paleness under her eyes, the way her hand never strayed far from the cradle rail. The old script was ready for her. Grieving widow, unstable, manipulable. She could taste it in the room. Elder Morcant opened first, voice brittle with performative concern. Given recent trauma, we recommend neutral custody of the child until succession clarity is restored. Neutral. The word came scented with false civility and Fenris's shadow. Elder Sella added, "The mother's judgment may be compromised. She attacked staff while in labor. There are allegations of delusion involving coordinated plots." Astrid's nails bit her palm. She kept her voice even. "They attempted to drug me and switch my daughter with a dead infant." Morcant spread his hands. Unverified under panic conditions. Before she could answer, Brennan stood. He did not bare teeth. He did not raise his voice. He stepped into the open space before the dais and recited law from memory, cadence precise enough that even hostile elders leaned in despite themselves. Founding Statute Succession Clause 9, Maternal Sovereignty Provision. In cases of disputed lineage at birth, the mother retains sole physical claim unless false maternity is proven by blood right before sworn witnesses. Any transfer without consent constitutes kidnapping under Pack War Code. His gaze moved from one elder to the next. "This is not interpretation. It is text." Clerk Parchment whispered as the scribe confirmed line and seal. A ripple moved through the benches. Morcant sniffed. "Text can be revisited in emergency." "Then file amendment after this hearing," Brennan said. "Until then, obey it." The resulting tension had weight. Astrid felt it in her teeth. Elder Sella rose anyway and descended 2 steps toward the cradle, smile fixed and chilly. "Surely no one objects to a brief examination for the council record." Astrid shifted forward, but Brennan moved first, one stride, then another, placing his body between Sella and Lyra with surgical finality. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. When he spoke, his aura unfurled. Not loud, but immense. A pressure that made lower-ranked wolves drop their eyes and hold breath. "Anyone touching Astrid Nightshade's daughter without consent," he said, each word clean as steel, "answers me in the challenge pit before moonrise." No one mistook it for metaphor. Sella stopped so abruptly her skirt snapped around her boots. Morcant sat down without being asked. Across the benches, 2 younger elders exchanged a look of sudden recalculation, then looked away. Astrid felt the moment land inside her, a non-trivial realignment of old assumptions. He had not taken the child to prove authority. He had used authority to prevent taking. He had not spoken over her claim. He had fortified it with law, then with force only when law was tested. Brennan turned his head slightly, enough for her to see the edge of his profile. "Do you consent to examination by Healer Tamsin only, in full view, with your hands on the child?" he asked. He asked in front of everyone. "Yes," Astrid said, and heard steadiness in her own voice for the first time in days. Tamsin conducted the examination where Astrid sat, narrating each step for the record, never once attempting to lift Lyra from her arms. Heartbeat strong, reflexes normal, scent matched to maternal line uncontested. The clerk wrote quickly, sanded the page, sealed it. When it was done, the hall noise returned in cautious threads. Not approval, not yet. But the script had cracked. Brennan resumed his place beside her chair rather than above her on the dais, close enough that she could feel the low thrum of the bond, distant enough to honor every boundary she still needed. Astrid looked at his hand resting open on the armrest between them, empty, waiting, and after a long breath she set 2 fingers lightly against his knuckles. Not surrender, not claim. A beginning. He did not move to close the gap. He simply turned his hand, palm up, and let her decide how long to stay. The crux was no longer whether Fenris Ashford had tried to steal her daughter. The crux was whether he could make the theft legal before dawn. Astrid kept her fingers on Brennan's upturned palm for 3 breaths, then withdrew when the tribunal doors opened, and a clerk hurried down the center aisle with a sealed satchel clutched to his chest. The room shifted at once. Conversation thinned. Elder Morcant straightened, then masked the movement with a cough. "Recovered from the border infirmary records locker," the clerk said, voice strained. "Hidden compartment. Counterseal broken in the presence of Captain Ives and 2 sworn witnesses." Brennan did not take the satchel first. He looked to Astrid. "Do you want this opened here, or in a closed chamber with your chosen witnesses?" Her exhaustion pressed at the base of her skull like a thumb, but clarity cut through it. Public could be theater. Private could be buried. "Closed chamber," she said. "Now, with Tamsin, the clerk, Captain Ives, and the scribe who logged Lyra's exam." Morcant rose half out of his seat. "You cannot sideline the council on material succession evidence." Astrid turned toward him with Lyra in her arms, blanket tucked high against the draft. "I can refuse to let men who called me delusional contaminate chain of custody." She held his gaze until he sat. "You can receive copies when seals are set." Brennan's mouth did not move, but approval rolled off him like contained weather. "Escort," he ordered, and the chamber doors opened. The records room off the great hall smelled of wax, old leather, and cold stone. Sconces hissed. The satchel was placed on a clear table. Every hand that touched it was named for the record. Astrid stood at the table instead of sitting, one palm on Lyra's back, counting each breath to keep the postpartum tremor from returning. Inside were 5 items: a forged lineage scroll naming a newborn male called Kaelin Ashford Nightshade as sole viable heir, 2 pre-written declarations of maternal instability bearing Morcant's and Scylla's wax marks, a payment ledger with coded transfers to the border infirmary, a route sheet marking the lambing tunnel Astrid had used to escape, and a narrow packet wrapped in oilskin stamped with Fenris's private seal. Captain Ives opened the packet with tongs and unfolded a single page. His jaw hardened. He handed it to Brennan, who read, then passed it to Astrid without commentary. The writing was Fenris's hand. She knew the slant, the clipped loops, the way he crossed a final stroke with needless pressure. Proceed with sedative if resistance exceeds labor tolerance. Stillbirth presentation to be immediate. Mother to be isolated on grounds of grief instability. Blue cloth confirms transfer complete. If female issue survives, mark as cursed line risk and quarantine narrative accordingly. Astrid read it twice because her mind refused the simplicity of evil written so plainly. Not rage at first. Not even grief. A strange, cold precision settled through her limbs, the way the world went quiet just before a winter branch cracked under too much weight. He planned every word he was going to say about me, she said. Tamsin's face had gone pale with fury. He wrote the diagnosis before seeing the patient. Brennan spoke toward the clerk. Read the ledger codes. The clerk laid translucent key paper over the page. Disbursements to infirmary midwife, 2 to border sentries, 1 to courier Corin Nightshade, he swallowed, and 1 to temple registrar for emergency guardianship filing fee. Astrid's nails dug into the table edge. Corin. Her cousin's name sat there in ink, reduced from person to transaction. Loaded memory, resolved in 1 line. Brennan's voice remained level. Timestamp? Filed for processing at moonrise tonight. That landed like a struck bell. Fenris was not waiting to see whether his first attempt failed. He had already moved to the second, using statute to cage what poison had not finished. Captain Ives gave a sharp nod toward the outer corridor. We also questioned the midwife under scent oath while you convened. She confessed to the swap, named Fenris as principal, and identified 2 additional accomplices in the lower gate barracks. Statement sealed and witnessed. Bring the confession record, Astrid said, and copy it 3 times. Brennan watched her as she spoke, not with surprise, but with the focus of a commander seeing a strategy lock into place. Fenris's objective is merger by emergency succession, he said, including her in the tactical frame rather than speaking over her. He removes your daughter, presents a puppet male heir, installs himself as regent over Nightshade, then claims cross-border stability requires Valewood military compliance. If I refuse, he paints me as aggressor who rejected lawful process. War by paperwork, Astrid said. And fear, Tamsin added. The cursed bloodmark rumor is already in the kitchens. I heard 2 attendants repeating it. Astrid looked down at Lyra, who made a small milk-drunk sigh and tucked her chin deeper into the blanket. He wants us isolated so theft looks like rescue. Brennan set both palms on the table, leaning just enough for the gold at the edge of his irises to catch torchlight. Then we strip him of darkness. Public moon court, full witness ring. You bring every physical item yourself and speak first. Astrid met his gaze. The bond between them tightened. Not gentle, not soft. More like 2 ropes pulled through the same ring. Fear was still there. Rowan's memory was still there. But so was a hard, rising certainty. I invoke the mother's claim, she said. No one in the room moved for a heartbeat. It was old law. rarely called because it could not be controlled once begun. Scent, blood, testimony, stone. No private rulings, no sealed bargains. The clerk exhaled shakily. Then I need your verbal declaration now for pre-registration. Astrid straightened despite the ache pulling at her core. Record this. I, Astrid Nightshade, lawful widow of Rowan Nightshade and birth mother of Lyra Nightshade, invoke mother's claim under Moon Court law against Fenris Ashford for conspiracy, attempted child substitution, and succession fraud. Wax pressed. Stylus scratched. Seals were set while she watched each imprint harden. By late afternoon, the fortress had turned into a hive of disciplined panic. Rumor moved faster than guards. Twice on the way from records to the secured chambers, Astrid caught the words cursed line threaded through lowered voices. A wet nurse assigned by the quartermaster arrived at her door, took one look at Lyra's dark hair and alert eyes, then asked to be reassigned for spiritual caution. Brennan dismissed her without scene and placed a veteran nanny from his war infirmary detail on the post instead, a woman named Mara who had delivered 6 litters and feared no gossip. Pressure came in formal clothing as well. 3 petitions arrived within an hour requesting temporary sanctified warding of the infant before Moon Court review. Neutral wording, same objective. Astrid made herself read each full page, then wrote denied across all 3 in her own hand. Inside her head, thoughts ran in hard present tense lines while she paced the chamber between feedings. I am tired enough to shake, and still I sign. I am bleeding, and still I decide. Every signature is a wall. Every refusal is a wall. They call me unstable because they need me quiet. They call my daughter cursed because they need her hidden. I am done being a corridor they walk through. I am a locked gate now. Let them bruise their hands. Brennan entered only after knocking, even now. He had removed his tribunal cloak and rolled his sleeves, rune scars faintly visible along one forearm. He carried a map tube and 2 cups of broth. Report? Astrid asked. He set the cups down and spread the map on the small table, weighting corners with carved stone wolves. Fenris has gathered 17 sworn blades at Ashford Lodge, 2 hours south. Not enough for open assault. Enough for interception, witness intimidation, or cradle snatch during transit. He pointed to 3 marked routes. He also petitioned for emergency session at the Moon Court Stones before your claim filing reached Central Registry. So he tries to arrive first and define the story. Yes. Lyra chose that moment to spit a bright line of milk across Brennan's cuff. The King of Valewood looked down at the stain with solemn horror, then up at Astrid. I appear to have lost rank. Astrid's mouth twitched despite everything. She is strict about protocol. 30 seconds of breath returned to the room. When she shifted Lyra to her shoulder, pain tugged low through her abdomen and she hissed. Brennan's hand moved, stopped, then rested on the table edge. Tell me what support you want on the record, he said. No assumptions. Armored escort, Tamsin at my side. I carry Lyra the entire hearing. No handoff except to Mara if I choose it. Done. She hesitated, then added, and you do not speak for me unless I ask. His jaw flexed once. That will be difficult. I know. He held her gaze. Done. The attraction between them had become a non-trivial strain in every shared silence. When he stood too close, her instincts sharpened and her pulse shifted to his rhythm in a way that felt like betrayal and refuge in the same breath. When he stepped away, cold followed. She did not trust the bond. She trusted choices. So she watched his choices relentlessly, and he kept making the same one. Restraint. At second bell after sunset, Captain Ives arrived with a bound prisoner taken near the lower kitchens, one of the gate barracks wolves named Duran. He reeked of fear and sedative herbs. Caught with this, Ives said, placing a folded cloth packet on the table. Sleeping compound strong enough to fell an adult shifter. He says he was told to place it near the infant's bedding and trigger a false seizure panic. Astrid's vision narrowed. Who told him? Message came through Temple courier marks, Ives said. Payment promised from Ashford Treasury. Brennan's expression went very still. Double the nursery perimeter. No one enters without Astrid's spoken consent and my captain's countersign. Ives nodded and left at a run. The strike came sooner than any of them expected. A horn sounded from the east corridor, one short blast, then two rapid. Not drill, breach. Brennan moved first, shoving the map table aside to clear space. Mara! He barked toward the door. Lockdown pattern 3. Astrid had Lyra against her chest before the echo died. The chamber lamps flickered as someone cut draft vents, plunging the hall outside into uneven shadow. Bootsteps pounded. Steel rang once, then again. Mara burst in with blood on her sleeve that was not hers, and a short sword in hand. Temple Guard uniforms, she snapped. False badges. They hit the nursery post and tried to lift the cradle. Astrid's entire body went cold, then molten. How many? 6 inside, more at the stair. Captain Ives crashed through behind her with 2 wolves, one limping. Outer gate signal confirms Ashford banners in the lower courtyard, he said. Fenris sent a legal writ and a grab team at the same time. Of course he had. Law in one hand, blade in the other. Brennan met Astrid's eyes. We move to the inner vault now. No. The word came from somewhere older than fear. If I hide, he files uncontested guardianship before moonset. A crash shook the corridor. Someone shouted. Another horn answered from the west tower. Ives swore under his breath. Message from court runner just arrived. Emergency session already opened at the Stones. If the mother is not present before moonrise, temporary custody defaults to petitioner under contamination clause. That clause is a separate temple emergency procedure, not an override of the founding maternal sovereignty statute, Brennan said, already moving. Fenris can exploit it for a temporary handhold, but it is challengeable only if you appear and contest in person. Fenris had timed everything to the minute. Another impact hit the chamber door, wood bowing inward. Through the split came the scent she would know anywhere now. Ash over polished cedar, expensive oil-masking rot. Fenris was close. Astrid handed Lyra to Mara for a single heartbeat, drew the birthing blade from the wrap at her waist, and took her daughter back into the crook of her left arm. Her right hand steadied the knife. She looked at Brennan, then at the shaking door. "Get me to the moon court," she said. The bar cracked. The door began to give. The bar cracked. The door split down the center, and the first intruder came through with a temple guard badge pinned crooked over borrowed leather. Brennan hit him chest first and drove him into the corridor wall so hard the badge spun off and skittered across the stone. Captain Ives and the 2 wolves beside him formed a wedge at the threshold, blades out, forcing the narrow entry into a choke point. Steel struck steel in rapid bursts. Mara backed toward the hearth with Astrid, sword raised, Lyra tucked against Astrid's sternum beneath Brennan's cloak. A second attacker slid low under Ives's guard and lunged for the bundle in Astrid's arms, fingers hooked to snatch and run. Astrid moved on instinct. She twisted her hips to shield Lyra and slashed down with the birthing blade. The man yelped and recoiled, clutching his wrist, not gravely hurt but out of reach. She did not pause to look at the cut. She reset her stance with Lyra high and tight, knife up, breath shallow and controlled. "Take the king alive," someone shouted from the corridor. "Take the infant now." Fenris's voice followed, smooth and carrying through chaos. "Careful with the child. We need her breathing for the record." He stepped into view at the far end of the passage, flanked by 2 men in Ashford colors beneath stolen cloaks. In one hand he held a rolled writ sealed with temple wax. In the other, a short curved blade dark with oil. His boots were still clean. "Astrid," he called over the clash of weapons, as if greeting her at a family meal. You missed the emergency session. Under contamination clause, temporary custody is already granted. Hand her over, and this can still look merciful. Brennan drove his elbow into an attacker's throat and snapped, "The clause does not override Founding Statute 9. Fenris smiled. "It does for the next 2 hours, which is all I need." One of Fenris's guards hurled a smoke vial down the hall. It shattered near the door, releasing a bitter cloud that burned eyes and lungs. Lyra cried out, small and frantic. Astrid turned her face into Brennan's cloak to shield the baby's nose and forced herself not to cough. Think in lines, one decision at a time. I do not freeze. I do not hand her to fear. I pick the path that keeps her name in law, not in mourning songs. If I hide, he writes the story without me. If I move, I risk everything in open stone and witness light. I choose the place where truth can still bite. Ives, Astrid said, louder than she thought she could manage. The evidence satchel. Now. Ives kicked an intruder backward, then jerked his chin to the limping wolf at his side. The wolf dove into the chamber, came up with the sealed satchel from the map table, and passed it to Mara, who shoved it against Astrid's hip beneath the cloak. Brennan fought his way backward until he stood directly in front of Astrid, body shielding her and Lyra from the corridor while never touching the child. His eyes had gone hard amber, predator-focused, but his voice to her was measured. Inner vault is 10 paces left. No. She met his gaze through smoke and noise. Moon court stones, right now. He bared his teeth at the attackers, then looked back at her, decision landing in one sharp breath. Pattern Raven! He barked to Ives. Moving package to court, live corridor, no stops. The formation changed instantly. Ives and one wolf at point. Brennan at Astrid's right flank. Mara at left. Final wolf rear guard. They drove into the corridor as a unit, not retreating, forcing a path through the breach. Fenris fell in behind them, laughing once, coldly. Run to the court if you like. You will arrive as the widow who brought violence into sacred procedure. Astrid did not answer. She counted steps. 12 to the stair. Down one flight slick with tracked snow and blood from someone else's sleeve. Across the lower gallery where banners snapped in a draft. Up the outer ramp toward the Moon Court arch, where bells were already ringing the second call to witness. By the time they reached the court stones, moonrise had edged silver over the fortress wall. The ring was lit with torch basins and packed with elders, guards, clerks, and wolves, drawn by alarm and rumor. Morcant stood near the registrar, face set in offended authority. Sella had positioned herself close to the dais, eyes bright with anticipation that looked too much like hunger. 2 temple adjudicators in white-gray robes held staffs crossed over the center mark, trying to maintain order while the crowd surged and craned for a view. Fenris strode in behind Astrid's escort and raised the writ high. Temporary custody order, he called. Mother absent from emergency filing, child marked as risk, transfer by sanctified authority. Murmurs ran through the ring like wind through dry leaves. Cursed line. Unfit. Contamination. Brennan stepped onto the lower stone and projected his voice without a roar. Counterclaim by Founding Statute 9 and active mother's claim filing, registered and sealed. The mother is present. Proceed by old law. One adjudicator hesitated. The other looked to Morcant. Morcant opened his mouth. Astrid cut across him. I invoke mother's claim in full witness. She walked into the center ring with Lyra in her arms and the satchel pressed under her elbow. No one helped her. No one could claim she had been carried. Postpartum pain pulled through her abdomen with every step, but she stayed upright until she reached the court stone carved with nightshade glyphs worn shallow by generations. Name your evidence, said the older adjudicator, voice formal now, compelled by the invocation. Astrid handed the satchel to the clerk and spoke clearly. Sedative vial shards recovered from birthing room floor, switched swaddling cloth prepared for false stillbirth. Midwife confession under scent oath, naming Fenris Ashford as principal. Payment ledger linking Ashford Treasury to infirmary staff, sentries, courier Corin Nightshade, and temple registrar filing fee. Written directive in Fenris's hand ordering sedation, substitution, and quarantine narrative if female child survives. The clerk read each item aloud as he unsealed it. Every seal held. Every name landed. Fenris spread his hands with practiced sorrow. A grieving widow can be coached. Documents can be planted. She attacked healers while laboring, and now drags sacred law through personal vengeance. Astrid shifted Lyra to her left forearm, opened her right palm with the birthing blade, and let blood bead. Then run. She pressed her hand to the court stone. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the nightshade glyph ignited beneath her fingers. Silver first, then burning gold. Light racing through old channels in the rock. Script rose above the stone in bright, suspended lines, each forged seal from Fenris's packet splitting apart in view of the entire ring. False wax marks outlined and branded with the same verdict in ancient legal script, invalidated by lineage truth. A collective gasp broke from the crowd. Morkant staggered back a step. Sella's face blanched. The registrar dropped his eyes to the ground. Astrid's voice shook once, then steadied. Under kin law, I challenge Fenris Ashford directly for conspiracy against my bloodline, murder plot, and attempted child theft. The adjudicator struck his staff to stone. Challenge recognized. Fenris's pleasant mask cracked. You think this makes you sovereign? He hissed. You were a vessel. Useful because you obeyed. He shifted mid-sentence, bones snapping into wolf form with brutal speed, half in cloth and half in fur, and launched toward Astrid and the child in a single low lunge designed for throat and momentum. Astrid moved first. She pivoted left to take Lyra offline, then drove the birthing blade down through Fenris's forepaw as it hit the dais edge, pinning him to the stone. He howled and thrashed, claws gouging grooves, but the blade held, buried to the hilt in old rock. She planted her boot on his wrist joint and leaned her weight with every trembling ounce she had left. Do not touch my daughter, she said, each word cut from iron. Fenris's guards surged forward. Brennan met them at the ring boundary with Ives and Mara, stopping them cold in a blur of controlled violence and thrown bodies. No killing strikes, only incapacitation and disarm. He did not cross into Astrid's challenge space. Fenris fought to wrench free, shifting back toward human form to grab at her ankle. She kicked his hand away. His face twisted up at her, blood at his lip, hatred naked now. You were meant to stay useful, he spat, not survive. Astrid looked down at him, at the man who had called murder governance and theft stability, at the clean boots finally dirtied by his own collapse. I was never yours to spend. She yanked the blade free and, under sanction, delivered one clean execution stroke across his throat. It was quick, final. The howl died. Fenris Ashford went still on the court stone while the glyph light above him flared once and extinguished. Silence hit the ring like a dropped curtain. Then the older adjudicator struck his staff 3 times. By witness, by blood, by lawful challenge, judgment is complete. Fenris Ashford is ended. Conspiracy stands proven. All related custody petitions are void. Astrid swayed. Brennan was beside the boundary in an instant but stopped at the line, waiting. Astrid. She adjusted Lyra, who had begun to fuss, alive and furious and real. Astrid stepped out of the challenge circle on her own feet and crossed the remaining distance to Brennan. Only then did she nod once. He put his hand at the center of her back, steadying, careful, reverent. Around them, wolves who had doubted her lowered their heads as the clerk began reading the invalidation orders into the night air, one by one, for every witness to carry home. Around them, Wolves who had doubted her lowered their heads as the clerk began reading invalidation orders into the night air, and Astrid stood very still while the adrenaline drained from her muscles in a violent shake. Brennan's hand remained at her back, not guiding, only steadying. Lyra rooted against her chest, upset by smoke and noise, and Astrid pressed her lips to the baby's hair until the crying eased. The adjudicators ordered the evidence table sealed in full witness, the sedative shards catalogued and boxed, the blue swaddling cloth tagged as substitution material, the midwife's confession copied and waxed, Fenris's directive displayed beside the ledger, then all 5 items transferred under guard to Fortress Archive with duplicate records lodged at the Moon Temple and Border Command. Nothing vanished into private drawers. Nothing went missing in transit. Brennan leaned close enough for only her to hear. Moon Temple is secure. No council voices inside, only sworn witnesses. We can wait until tomorrow. Astrid looked at him, at the strain held behind his composure, and then at Lyra's small fist curled in the fur of his cloak. No more waiting for men like him to write first and force us to answer. Tonight. He searched her face for hesitation and found none. Then, tonight. The temple sat above the court ring, carved into mountain stone veined with silver that caught fire under moonlight. Mara carried Lyra up the last steps while Astrid climbed beside Brennan, one hand on the rail, pain pulling through her healing body with each rise and fall of breath. By the time they reached the inner sanctuary, the world had narrowed to torchlight, cedar smoke, and the pulse in her throat that answered his from 3 feet away. Tamsin waited by the hearth with fresh linens and a warmed basket lined in lamb's wool. Captain Ives stood at the threshold with 4 oath-bound guards, backs turned to grant privacy until called. Outside the carved doors, pack witnesses gathered in respectful silence, present for law, absent for intimacy. Mara laid Lyra in the basket near the hearthstones where the heat was gentle and even. The baby sighed, milk-drunk and drowsy, and settled with one cheek against her fist. Astrid watched until she was sure the rise and fall of that tiny chest stayed steady. Only then did she turn. Brennan had removed his sword belt and gauntlets, leaving them on the temple altar. He stepped into the center circle and went to one knee before her, head bowed, throat bared in deliberate vulnerability. The gesture struck harder than any declaration. An alpha king could command armies with a lifted hand. "Here," he asked. His voice was low, roughened by the long night. "Astrid Nightshade, I offer bond and crown without seizure, without silence, without taking from you what is yours to name. I am yours to refuse. I am yours to claim. Do you consent to be marked as my mate?" Her heart slammed once, twice, and memory rushed in jagged layers. Rowan's laughter in summer rain, ash thick in her lungs, the broken vial, Lyra's first cry, Brennan kneeling in blood and asking permission when no one else had bothered. Grief did not leave. It shifted shape and made room. She stepped closer until his breath touched the inside of her wrist. "I consent," she said, "on one law, mutual claim." His gaze lifted, amber deepening toward gold. "Mutual." Astrid slid her fingers under his chin and guided him to stand. She turned, baring the junction of neck and shoulder, pulse jumping beneath skin. The temple air cooled the damp strands of hair at her nape. Brennan's hand came to her waist, firm and careful, waiting for the final assent. "Yes," she whispered. He bent and placed his mouth to her skin first in a reverent press, giving her one last heartbeat to pull away. She did not. His bite came controlled and precise, pain bright and immediate, then widening into heat that spread through her chest, down her spine, and out along her arms in molten waves. She caught a breath against his shoulder, fingers digging into the linen at his back. The pain did not vanish. It transformed, becoming fierce clarity, a live current of recognition that opened every sealed room inside her at once. The bond surged. She felt him as if distance had been erased, his restraint like drawn steel, his old guilt, the exact shape of his fear when he thought he might fail her, and beneath all of it a devotion so steady it frightened her more than violence ever had. No demand, no leash, a vow with teeth. He lifted his head slowly, lips stained with a thin line of her blood, and pressed his forehead to hers. Mine, he breathed, not as ownership, as pledge. Astrid's hand shook once before it steadied. Yours, she answered, and meant chosen, not taken. She touched the mark over his collarbone where old scar crossed new skin. My turn. Brennan turned his body to give her full access, no flinch, no brace. She tasted cedar and salt when she pressed her mouth to him. Then she bit, harder than he had, claim and warning in equal measure. He exhaled a broken sound and held still, letting her set the depth. Blood welled warm across her tongue. The temple glyphs ignited around them in a soft gold ring, responding to paired consent and shared mark. The second bite sent a sharper pulse through the bond, and what had been a taut line snapped into a complete circuit. Images flickered between them in brutal, tender sequence. Her running through snowmelt with one hand over her belly, his younger self kneeling beside a grave he had never named aloud. Lyra blinking up at torchlight, Rowan's face held in respectful distance like a book she could keep without closing the next chapter. Their scents braided, storm and wildflower smoke and newborn milk, settling into one recognizable home scent that belonged to this family and no one else. Mate, he whispered against her mouth, voice unsteady for the first time she had ever heard. Mate, she echoed. When the light faded, they remained wrapped around each other in the center circle, breathing in sync while the bond settled from wildfire to heartbeat. Brennan gathered her against his chest, one hand spanning the back of her neck beneath fresh mark, the other splayed protectively over her shoulder without pressing. Astrid let her weight rest against him and discovered the world no longer pitched beneath her feet. Not because danger was gone, because she was no longer carrying it alone. By dawn, frost had silvered the temple steps when they walked out together with Lyra between them. Astrid holding her daughter and Brennan flanking her half a pace behind in public deference to her claim. The witnesses waiting outside bowed first to the child, then to Astrid, then to the king. 3 days later, in the same great hall where elders had questioned her sanity, Astrid sat at the high table while the unification accord was read line by line. She did not let anyone summarize it. Captain Ives presented arrest outcomes in open session. The false Temple Guard team disarmed and sentenced to labor service under oath binding. Duren's testimony accepted in exchange for exile beyond both territories. The corrupt registrar stripped of office and confined. The midwife and complicit assistant remanded to Moon Temple custody for life service in plague wards under supervision, never again permitted near births. Corin Nightshade was brought in chains, eyes hollow. He admitted he had sold the lambing tunnel route and accepted Ashford coin, then looked at Astrid once as if expecting mercy he had not earned. She gave him law instead. Permanent banishment from Nightshade land, name struck from succession rolls. He wept and said nothing more. Morkant and Selah attempted one final procedural delay. Brennan did not answer them. Astrid did. She ordered the clerk to read their pre-signed instability declarations aloud beside Fenris's directive, then signed removal orders from council authority for both, effective immediately. Their loaded glances from that first tribunal finally paid in full. They had known enough to prepare papers before any examination began. The hall heard it. The hall believed it. At sunset, she stood in the archive vault while the evidence chests were shelved under triple seal. She watched each label set by hand. Sedative vial shards, substitution cloth, confession tablets, payment ledger, forged scroll, original directive, preserved for precedent. She added one final document herself. Sanctuary Edict 1, granting widows and orphaned pups protected status, independent legal counsel, and maternal custody priority unless blood right proved fraud before public witness. The wound became framework. No one could call it private grief now. By the first winter moon, the courtyard was full, torches burning blue-white in the cold, wolves from both territories shoulder to shoulder without drawn steel. Lyra wore a tiny fur-lined mantle and stared at the lights with solemn outrage until Mara made a ridiculous face and won a brief, scandalized giggle from half the front row. Tamsin stood at Astrid's right in formal healer gray, newly appointed chief of the border infirmary under direct crown charter. Captain Ives took command of the unified guard. Peace looked less like celebration and more like structure holding where it used to crack. Brennan lifted the silver-black crown but did not place it until Astrid nodded. "Astrid Nightshade Valewood," he said, voice carrying across stone and winter air. "High Luna Queen by blood, by claim, by witness, and by choice." He set the crown on her head. Then he knelt first. The court followed, row by row, including those who had doubted loudest. Astrid felt Lyra's warm weight against her chest, Brennan's marked shoulder at her side, and the settled bond between them, steady as mountain bedrock. She looked over the kneeling crowd, over banners bearing both sigils, over a future that had nearly been buried before first breath, and lifted her daughter so every witness could see her. "Heir of Nightshade," Astrid said, clear and calm. "Heir of Valewood, protected by law, by pack, by us." Brennan rose and took his place beside her, their fingers lacing around Lyra's blanket. Under the winter moon, with enemies finished and no shadow left unspoken, they stood as mate, as family, and as home.